What's up, Remington?
What's going on, Matt, with 1T? You doing all right, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah. I haven't seen you in a while, man.
I think this is the longest time that we've not seen each other. It's kind of depressing, man. You know?
I know at night I've been crying.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
So I miss you, bud.
Yeah.
Good seeing you.
Miss your warmth.
I went on the reason why is because I went on vacation and then I unfortunately got COVID. So, things happen.
Yeah, it happens. Usually it happens when you go on vacation too.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, no, I'm back in the saddle, ready to rock and roll. That's for sure.
Cool. Well, this is the Listen to This Bull live podcast, live stream. Both of those, really. We have an actual podcast. It's on Spotify and Apple and Google and all that fun stuff. And you can find that on our website, listentothisbull.com. But this show is all about answering your questions live. So if you have a question for us, we want to get it from you in the comments. All you have to do is post your comment, and then we'll answer that question. It doesn't matter what the question is. It could be a weird question. It could be, what kind of weird foods did you not taste properly when you had COVID, Remington?
That was everything.
Everything tasted weird to you?
It was so weird, man. It was a weird experience.
I'd ask you if you were vaccinated, but I don't want this to turn into a political argument.
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. People, they talk that, they think that somebody has a political stance, but yeah.
Yeah. It gets weird. All right. So today we have Daniel Robosky. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'm sure he's going to tell me, but even if he tells me and I get it wrong, I'm still going to call him Robosky because it just sounds cooler.
Let's do it.
Add a W in there. Daniel is a badass water mitigation contractor / PA. I think he does mostly PA work these days, but he was doing major projects, high rises, monster mitigation projects. So he and I have had conversations lately about industrial hygienists and some of the stuff that they put into their reports from the carrier. And that's what we're going to talk about today is industrial hygienists that seem to be controlled by the insurance companies and what it is that we can do about it. So without further ado, this is Daniel Robosky. How do you actually pronounce it?
It is Robosky. There's a make-believe W in there.
Yeah,
so
all right, cool.
Yeah, it's good to see you guys. Remington, nice to see you. It's been a few months. Yeah. So that was quite the intro. I don't know if I can live up to that hype, but we'll play.
Well, I only called you a badass. Are you saying you're not a badass?
It's not a big deal.
Matt, what are you drinking?
I don't want to say.
Okay.
It's not beer.
You don't want to get in a look. That's what my wife drinks, man.
I hated these things for years and years. And then after COVID, I like to get sugar-free or not sugar-free, real sugar sodas. And those became so scarce during COVID that I couldn't get them. So my wife was constantly getting these things, and I thought they were gross. But one day I had some lime flavored one. She always gets the weird flavors like watermelon squash or something weird like that. Squash. And so the lime ones aren't bad. So I started drinking those, and now I can't stand regular soda at all, even the other stuff.
Okay. There you go.
Where did I lose my hat? I haven't lost it. She's taking a breather from me. We've kind of split up a little bit for a moment. One day she'll come back, hopefully. She caught me wearing a different hat. That was.
So, hey, Dan, it looks like I'm in the haunted mansion.
Are you in a haunted mansion? It does with those interesting shadows.
Yeah, I guess it does. There's this I guess, what is it? A chandelier. And then the chandelier has these little lines. So I guess that's what the reflection is. Gotcha. And I don't have natural light right now because it is dark. I'm sorry, Ashley. Hey, well, let me ask you this. First off, before we get on track here, this is the only show in the entire world I would miss at least like 3 or 4 innings of the World Series to be on. Okay. If there's anything else, I don't care what it was, I would not be there. So I'm committed. I love you all. Letting you know that. Just want to throw it out there. Daniel,
I feel like we should just shut this down right now and just say
goodbye.
Yeah.
Daniel, tell us about like what you specialize in and everything. I know Matt did the introduction, but tell us a little bit about what you do, man.
So we're a PA firm first and foremost, and a lot of what we do are water claims. Where a lot of PAs kind of tend to live in that residential roof, commercial roof world. We get into a little bit more of the complex water claims and mold claims. We start diving off into asbestos and lead and some of those kind of more niche things. And I think that kind of sets us apart a little bit, just because everybody that's within the firm, it came from that mitigation world. So it was kind of a natural evolution for us to jump right into not doing just roofs, basically.
No, that makes sense.
I think most PAs in this industry do start off with roof claims. They're simple. But there are a lot of PAs that really jump directly into fire or water just because they come from that world. So there's mitigation guys that become public adjusters. I was a roofer. I became a PA. Obviously, I did mostly roofs. But we did quite a bit of water as well, and they do get interesting. It is a nice change of pace, but it can be a completely different process dealing with a complex claim like a water claim. So
well, and the expectations are always different, right? Because you never know what you're walking into. A hailstorm hits, one of the major markets. It's easy to go out there and say, okay, these 100 houses that are all 30-year shingles, those are turn and burn. They're macroed, so to speak. And water, fire are always kind of unique. They don't ever mimic the one before it. There are similarities and there are certain guidelines that you have to follow, but they're different every single time. And I think that's what keeps it interesting.
I agree. I mean, there's so many different materials that the water will go through. So Matthew Peterson asked, by water, do you mean leaks or flood or both? Any issues with flood claims, specifically with lack of coverage?
So depending on where it's at in the country, you have lack of coverage issues, especially on the coast of Texas. Anytime you start dealing with TWIA, there may be coverage, but there may not be money to back it up. So, but to answer the first part of that question, both, right? So here in Texas this year, we had the big freeze, which was leaks. It was whether it was fire suppression systems or main lines from the city. Floods obviously come into play when you start talking about hurricanes and that sort of thing. So we do both. We haven't run across a claim yet where we weren't able to navigate the lack of coverage, because it's usually an exclusion within the policy somewhere that we're working around, making it subsequential to a certain part of the loss, as opposed to just jumping in there and saying, well, it's wet, so you guys need to cover it.
Sure. I mean, if you're dealing with any kind of groundwater issue, you're often dealing with the exclusion section that has the anti-concurrent causation language. So trying to get anything past that is a little bit more difficult without a flood coverage. But even the seepage exclusions and things there's very interesting caveats on the policies for those. It can get very detailed. I like those. They're a lot of fun, actually, to try to find coverage on those policies when you really dig into the exclusions with the ensuing loss provisions. And some of them get a little bit complex. It's kind of fun.
Well, and that's the world that you live in. You enjoy kind of diving way off into the policy language and stuff like that. We usually, I know me personally, I tend to look at it more from a means and methods perspective than, what specific exclusion exists within the policy, and then is it re-endorsed later or whatever the case may be. I think that's something that the industry, I think, fails to understand a lot of times, is that, yeah, we're all trying to accomplish the same goal, but our tactics are all different, right? So some guys are going to dive way off into policy language and want to find those very minute, kind of very hidden off in the language ways to navigate the claim. And then you have guys like me who are just going to go out there and, kind of push our way into it, look at it from a means and methods perspective. And I don't think either one's right or wrong. We just different perspectives. And I think there's an expectation change in there sometimes, where a contractor wants us to come in and just kind of be this golden ticket. And when you start walking down the road of water claims and fire claims, stuff like that, it's not a realistic expectation at all.
You mean you're not magical as a PA? What are you talking about?
I am, just not as a PA.
Hey, Daniel, you're exactly right. And I do the same thing with, law work. I have colleagues I work with every single day in my office. They like to do things differently. And hey, look, what's the saying? Like, there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. You just get to the same result. Matt, this guy loves policy, man. He'll dive in there. He'll bring out that highlighter. He'll go after it. But Matt, I remember there was one claim that we worked on together, and it was like a seepage type claim. And like you said, it said, seepage is obviously an exclusion in the policy. And then it had this one word and says, unless, and then it said it was hidden. And so those small little words like that exactly turn a claim completely into 180. So yeah, you're exactly right.
But that's something that Matt and I've talked about recently, say in the last month or so, was some of the new language in IICRC. The release for this year was some of those changed from should to shall. And until you actually dive off and read it, that those are massive changes that, unless you actually took the time to dive off in there, you'd never know.
Right.
100%. I haven't gotten a chance to read through the newest version of it. I keep waiting for the fire standard to come out, but they keep pushing that back, I guess. It's kind of sad. Anyway, so for today's topic, we're talking about industrial hygienists. And these are individuals who, some of them are certified and have gone to school and gotten a degree in microbiology or something along those lines. And they are a certified industrial hygienist, but they have people working for them pretty often that are not certified industrial hygienists. They might just be, what would you call those guys?
I think in the industry, we'd like to make titles up for people. The one I ran across the other day was senior environmental scientist.
Right.
It sounds super great.
Yeah, it's just like a forensic engineer.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, at least they hold a license, Matt. They
have an engineering license.
Yeah. Right.
There's no forensic engineer license.
What makes somebody a scientist? How do you declare yourself a scientist?
You could get a bachelor's of science in just about anything.
Yeah. So in regards to our stuff, our industry is so good about just making names up, just applying them to things. And I think what that does is causes a lot of confusion on what these people actually know and how they apply it, and whether they were actually trained to do it or they just lived in the space long enough and moved up in a position and just got a cool title along the way, because we run across those guys a lot.
How much do the titles matter when they get into court?
They matter, man. I mean, some of these do. Okay, let me rephrase this. Holding a license is what matters. Having that behind your name, whether it's a public adjuster, whether it's an engineer, hygienist, those types of licenses, in my opinion, matter. You just, joining an association and having a couple letters behind your name because you're an association or something of that effect, it doesn't matter to me. But credentials do matter. Experience matters. Licenses do matter. But somebody just calling themselves a scientist just because they want to call themselves a scientist, to me, it doesn't hold that much water. But Matt, I know you've seen this before, and Daniel, you probably have too. I've gotten emails from people in this industry, and there's literally like 20 abbreviations after their name, and I'm just like, well, this guy must have been in school for like 300 years. Like, I don't know how he's what's going on here? So that's when you scratch your head and you're like, there's
you muted yourself.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but yeah. Hey, look, having experience, having credentials, licenses, certifications, things like that, that's what matters, in my opinion.
Well, and look, if I see a bunch of acronyms behind somebody's name, I'm going to then start to look into, one, what those acronyms are, especially if I haven't seen them. And then two, I'm going to validate that it actually applies to what we're looking at, right? Just because your title says engineer on it doesn't mean that you have the slightest idea to the specifics of whatever engineering needs to be out there. I mean, we've had general engineers show up on MEP claims, and you're like, you're not the guy. Please send out the right guy. And then the delay happens, and you wait another 60 days for their schedule to clear up, because apparently they're the busiest people on the planet.
Yeah, those engineers, they have to, according to the ethics code that they abide by for most states anyway, professional engineers can't take on a project that they are not competent in. And if they do, then they could get in trouble with their own engineering association, and possibly even with their licensing board. But that's a whole separate issue. But in a real way, the engineer problem is very similar to the IH problem that we are discussing. They're treated as experts by the carrier and sent out. Obviously, public adjusters and the policyholders also hire industrial hygienists all the time. But the ones that are hired by the carrier are sent out to evaluate the claim, and they seem to, very similar to engineers, come back with something that's very biased. So tell the story that you had recently.
Oh, so, and I won't mention the company that came out, but we had a water loss from the freeze that we were dealing with, that we got out there probably 6 months post loss. It took them another 90 days to actually show up, and this was the guy with the senior environmental scientist title. And he said, well, why do you guys have everything categorized as Cat 3? He said, this was clean water. And I said, it was not clean. And he said, well, where's your sewage screening? And I said, why do I need to do a sewage screening to categorize the loss? And he said, well, in order for it to be Cat 3, it has to travel through feces. And I said, that is absolutely incorrect. It is blatantly untrue. And I said, we're going to argue about this. I said, so I'm going to stop having this conversation. You can go gather the data that you need to gather, and then we'll argue about it after the fact. I said, but the fact that you just stood here straight face, told me that if it doesn't pass through shit, then it's not Cat 3. We're done. We don't need to continue to have a conversation. But that bias exists there right out of the gate, where as the last 48 hours have progressed with this guy's out there, it has just been them looking at what we wrote in our scope and picking apart those items, not actually going out to quantify the magnitude of the loss, not actually going out to justify the categorization or say if there needs to be additional testing done or if there doesn't.
They're not setting any kind of a protocol. They're just adjusting the loss, basically, it sounds like.
Based off of what we wrote, not looking at anything. If we identified as an area of no damage found, they weren't even walking into it.
I've said this to a lot of contractors over the years, and in most states, the policy specifies what the policyholder is supposed to do. And one of the conditions is that they have to present the damage to the carrier, present the damage materials often as reasonably required, whatever. Present the damage is the commonality between policies. And so if you aren't presenting the damage, then they technically haven't been notified of it and don't have to investigate something that you haven't claimed. You haven't claimed that damage. So if you put it in your report, they don't necessarily have to go outside your report and try to find something else to pay for. So I wonder if that's the reason they're doing that.
I would agree with you to an extent. However, if you are going to dispute the findings that are in the initial report, then I think there is a further investigation that's required it's the prove me wrong game, right? If I say that this area was wet 90 days ago, odds of it being wet today are slim, right? So how do you prove me wrong in that scenario without doing some level of further investigation beyond what I wrote? So I agree with what you're saying to an extent, but I think that there's layers to that conversation for sure.
There is layers to it. By the time it gets to Remington would easily be able to argue that it's unreasonable that they didn't do the full extent of the investigation themselves anyway, right, Remington?
But I also think that creates bias. And just right out of the gate, it creates bias.
And I just recently had a case in which I got an ICRC expert involved to define Cat 3. And I just pulled up his report, and I'm going to read what he said. Just a little phrase of it. He goes, yeah, Cat 3 water, it's quote unquote grossly contaminated. This includes sewage. So he is right on one point, but it also includes waistline backflows originating behind the trap, seawater, rising water from any rivers or streams, wind-driven rain that goes through the actual asphalt shingles, and then that material is into the house as well. Any type of hurricane or tropical storm. So it goes on and on. It's just it doesn't say just sewage, and this is a guy who really knows his stuff. You know,
talk about biological agents and anything that would be unhealthy in the water. So my question to you, real quick, Daniel, I have to know this before we can move on. Have you ever Aaron Brockovich the guy and just like poured some of the water into a glass and said, if it's clean water, drink it?
I will not confirm nor deny that that's happened.
I want to do that.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I should do that in trial in front of the jury. I should pour it in the cup and say, jury, will you take a sip of this? If it's no, then you got to go with my client. You know, I mean, seriously. So
that would be
that would be cool.
Here's something that I think everybody wants to look at what the category 3 definition is, right? More importantly, though, people need to look at the category 2 definition and the additional portion of that. And I've actually got it pulled up here. It says category 2 water can deteriorate to category 3. Once microorganisms become wet from the water intrusion, depending on the length of time that they remain wet and the temperature, they can begin to grow in numbers and then can change the category of the water. So that's important when you start to exceed that 72-hour general guideline, right? That's obviously not set in stone, but
48 to 72 hours. I mean, that's a huge, weird gap, but okay.
It is, but that portion of the category 2 definition, in my opinion, is more important than the actual category 3 definition, because the category 3 definition is written so vaguely that the term grossly contaminated gets people to this point where they're like, well, it has to be catastrophically bad. No, it doesn't. If water travels through insulation or through drywall or ACMs or whatever, it's contaminated, period.
Is it grossly contaminated when someone would look at it and go, gross? Is that how it becomes grossly contaminated?
We just need a bunch of teenagers to follow us around and be like, touch that. Ooh,
gross.
No. That's it.
In the expert that I was discussing, the IICRC expert, he defines grossly contaminated when it becomes in any way and shape, form harmful to a person. So like you said, if it goes through the insulation, things like that, where it becomes any harmful at all, that's when it's considered that Cat 3 grossly contaminated.
So I actually talked to a CIH who was one of the writers of the new IICRC this morning, and the conversation was, I was kind of explaining the deal out here that I was talking about earlier, and her response was, we can absolutely go down a rabbit hole of all of the different materials that are involved in building a structure and how as soon as water touches those, it obviously becomes contaminated, right? She said, but further than that, the issue that we run into is that anybody can go online, get a WRT certification, and all of a sudden they know everything there is to know about what IICRC says. And that's not, it doesn't apply when you can't understand the simple definitions of words, right? So just because it says grossly contaminated doesn't mean that it's this, unimaginable situation that you can't fathom. It's so large and so contaminated that it's, you couldn't even breathe in there. That's not what those terms mean. And so there's nobody monitoring the interpretation of IICRC as they are putting people out there in the world to be either teachers or appliers of the knowledge that they're gaining. And so much of it is open to interpretation that you get guys like that say, well, it says the word feces in there, sewage, so it has to pass through feces. And I told you earlier, I heard, well, IICRC only exists in Florida. So there's such a discrepancy in how people who have the ability to interpret what IICRC says, even though it's in black and white, they're not being taught appropriately to apply it to the field.
Sure.
No, I agree 100%. I've had cases where it's not interpreted.
You broke up a lot. I think
Oh, did it?
Maybe I understood what you said.
I got you. Basically, people are being trained efficiently how to apply what they're learning in the field is basically what I was saying.
And the only reason why, Daniel, you were breaking up, your connection was off. That's why it sounded like you were, on Star Wars or something, like a robot.
I was hoping for Max Headroom.
I could piece it together for sure.
That's even better. So, well, let's get to this question. What's the proper protocol for interior restoration after Cat 3 water damage?
Oh, wow. That's such an open-ended question.
That's a very big question. So,
Generalized
porous materials versus non-porous, all that kind of stuff. Just very general.
So the first step is that, again, you go back to IICRC, the contractor, more often than not, is the first one on site. The contractor can and should categorize the water. So they should be able to categorize whether it's Cat 1, Cat 2, or Cat 3, right? And then obviously determine, based on what that cat category is going to determine what they do, right? So they need to dry the space, whether that's water extraction, whether that's air movers and dehues and desiccants. The space has to be dry and then stabilized, and remediation efforts need to start, whether that's 2-foot ribs, 4-foot ribs, floor to ceiling, all the flooring needs to come out. That's, again, very open-ended. I'm trying to surmise the whole thing, but at some point in there, you want to engage an industrial hygienist. I know every single claim that we do, we bring in an IH, and then we try to use different IHs all the time too, so we don't create that bias. But that's the fundamentals of it, right? You have to dry the space out in some capacity, whether it's extracting from carpet, extracting from hard floors, and then once the space is stabilized, then you can do post clearance and make sure there's no microbial growth. But you have a bunch of stuff that can come into play there too when you start talking about asbestos and lead, and
if you're going to cut into anything,
where are the stopping points?
Yeah.
What are the state requirements? Certain states require you to do ACM testing before you even touch it. It doesn't matter what year the building was built. Oklahoma's that way. There's the Oklahoma statutes state that you have to do ACM testing. They don't care if the building was built in 2020.
Wind driven rain would be the primary basis for my question. It's all the same answer. It doesn't matter where the water came from. If it's category 3, it's category 3.
Right. Yeah. So, where you're going to get into the argument is whether there's an exclusion in there for wind driven rain. So from a PA's perspective, you're going to have that argument. But Matt's right that category 3 is category 3. So
yeah. So this IH comes out and he says that he's looking for sewage. Where do you think he? Obviously, that's written in there, but where do you think he got that specific training from? Who taught him to do that?
I don't know, because in order to be an IICRC trainer, you're supposed to have the mastery level of what is there, 8 different certifications that fall into that master certification. Like, you're supposed to have all of those before you can become a trainer. And so I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, but we run across the weird stuff like that all the time, and all it does is just cause tension within the claim, and then both sides end up spending money to try and figure out who's right. And again, I think it's an application of knowledge learned, and it's not being applied appropriately.
Yeah, I think that there is a very similar issue as far as engineers and industrial hygienists. If an engineer comes out and puts some things on paper or leaves certain things out on purpose, it can definitely lead to some issues with the claim. In
we ask
Georgia,
for their
we've got,
certifications.
you know, at least there's a certified industrial hygienist certification. You know,
Well, look, this goes back to what Remington was saying as far as licensures go. I have a joke in our office that I will always trust a person with a stamp. If there is a stamp that comes with your name, we're good, right? Certified industrial hygienist, notaries for fun. I mean, I don't know, whatever. But my point is, if your name comes with a stamp, then you had to do something to get to that point, right? And so
I have a stamp I put on my envelopes, and it puts my name and address on it automatically.
Deal.
You trust me more suddenly because I told you I have that?
2 points. 2 points.
Love it.
So if in Georgia we have an industrial hygienist that commonly gives us some crap. And it's not that he's writing anything that may be illegal. In fact, it might be, I still think it is, but it might be legal. I haven't had an industrial hygienist that was willing to write against it because he's saying that it's being done under containment. So let me explain. If there's asbestos containing material into the drywall, drywall mud, and you've got drywall that's wet, butted up, you know, same wall, and it's dry over here. And they say, well, okay, well, you can tear out the wet drywall at a stud. That's me. I'm a stud.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So tear out the wet drywall at a stud. That was for my wife. I hope she's watching. And leave the existing drywall behind, and then color this with brightly colored paint so that the drywall installers who put new drywall in will know when to stop sanding. And that's a ridiculous statement for many reasons, because, you know, if you are vibrating an ACM wall that, by the way, was considered friable every single time, then you are going to disperse asbestos into the air. If you're attaching things to the same stud that drywall is attached to, screwing it on, hammering something on, you are aggressively manipulating this friable material. So if it's all done under containment, then possibly that could be done, because you're dispersing the contaminant into the air, but then you're putting everything through a HEPA filter anyway. You're using wet methods for everything that you're doing, and you're in full PPE, and you're taking these showers on site, and you're leaving. If it's all done under containment, I guess technically it could be done. Of course, the carriers aren't estimating for it that way.
Yeah, because you have to look at it from again, it's a cost conversation, right? What is the cost to set up additional containment identifiers within the space, and then who's doing that? So you're still having to sub out a third party to do asbestos survey. Certain states you can survey and not abate. Certain states you can survey and abate. So let's just say it's one of those states where you can't do both, right? So then you have the contractor who's expending man hours. You're going to have an asbestos surveyor come in, identify, create protocol and a containment plan, and then an abatement company who's going to come in and do that. But then you're going to ask the contractor to then come back in after the fact into a space that is quote unquote clean and now install. Why would you not? But actually, you know what, as I'm talking through it, I would be more interested in what Georgia's state statutes say in regards to ACM, because I'll roll back to Oklahoma again, where if you have, let's say the drywall in that room has confirmed asbestos in it, you have to remove all of it. You have to abate it in its entirety. And so I wonder where the cutoff on that is. It leaves it very open-ended, right?
It is.
But I can't imagine the carrier. Well, nothing that the carrier does surprises me, but you would have to look at that from a cost perspective and say, what are the man-hour requirements to accomplish the bullshit that you just put out there into the universe comparatively?
That we had to figure out was, who the hell's going to want to install that drywall? You have to have somebody that's specifically trained for dealing with this, has to wear PPE. Doing drywall work sucks to begin with. Now you're asking this drywall installer to do all this under containment. That's a ridiculous thing.
But also, here's something to consider too. When you're doing an asbestos survey, you're taking a sample of like materials within a space, right? So who's determining where asbestos containing drywall starts and asbestos containing drywall stops?
Oh, it's all there. It's all asbestos containing. It's all ACM. It's all
right.
Rackham.
So my point is that where's that line then? Who's creating that line? If you're doing a normal asbestos survey, you're doing samples of like materials, right? So I'm going to pull one out of the carpet, one out of the carpet glue, one out of the drywall mud, popcorn, whatever. At that point, if I find a positive asbestos test on the drywall, then all of the drywall's coming out. I'm not sitting here saying, well,
it should be
only half of this room. Yeah, that's a weird.
From a policy standpoint, then, from a policy standpoint, the carrier's allowed to repair or replace whichever's cheaper.
It's not cheaper,
and they aren't necessarily required to remove all drywall just because it contains asbestos, because a lot of times pollutants is excluded as a cause of loss. So if the cause of loss of removing all this additional drywall is that it contains asbestos, that cause of loss is excluded. But if it's part of the same repair for the drywall that got wet or wetted from whatever the water loss was, then if it's part of that repair to remove all of it, then that has to come out. So if a repair can be done where they don't have to remove the non-wetted drywall, if it can be done and it's cheaper than replacing all of it, then the policy supports that. But the problem is, this industrial hygienist has said that this can be done under containment, all of it. Of course, they don't specify that last part very clearly. It just says you can do all this after having said that it would be removed under containment, and never said anywhere at the end that the containment ended after they removed it.
So, but also, I mean, but you're specifically talking about drywall. You're not discussing insulation. Are we talking interior walls or exterior walls? Right. There's a bearing.
Interior walls that they're doing this on most of the time, and a lot of times they even do it from a flood cut.
And are we talking? I mean,
yeah,
that makes my brain hurt.
I know.
Just in its entirety.
It's unreasonably putting the insured at risk is really what it is. You're leaving them in a position where it's very likely that there's going to be a problem when you don't have to. It's much more reasonable just to remove the entire run of drywall. But that's the kind of crap that we're talking about. It's BS written reports that an industrial hygienist would never have that happen in their parents' house.
No, that's right. I wish everybody thought that would include that in their line of thinking. Because I'll give you, let's go down another small rabbit hole here. So I've got
what is
a company
your mug real quick. What's
it's it's a Robosky Consulting mug.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I saw the question pop up there. So I've got another one that came back from a third party. I don't even know what you want to call them, if we're being honest. It was one of the worst scope quantifications I've ever run across. And they go down the road of miscategorization of water. Should have been a Cat 2, not Cat 3, which was wrong. And so you had a certified industrial hygienist stamp off on it saying that it was Category 3, that the protocol was set, the entire letter was written, it was stamped off, everything was good. And so these guys who have no, the guy's title is just consultant, nothing, at least he didn't have a bunch of extra acronyms on there, but he goes down and to say, no stamp on this guy. He said, so this should have been Category 2. The loss was a clean water loss stemming from plumbing lines breaking due to freezing. So we've already kind of went over how that's bullshit. But so he continues to go further.
Was like it was.
Yeah.
When it immediately left the pipe.
Right. But then they start talking about all those other ancillary things that shouldn't have been done in conjunction with the loss, because it's no longer Cat 3, it's Cat 2. Right. So you start to go down the rabbit hole of equipment decontamination, the PPE requirements, but then they revert back and start talking about the Texas governor's order, about sales tax during a disaster. And, so you're sitting here kind of pushing off into one direction, but then coming back and saying that certain things should be allowed and certain things should be excluded when it's black and white. And these guys don't have any justification as to why they're disagreeing with the certified industrial hygienist who stamped off on this. And all of those additional things total a few $100,000 on this particular claim that they're excluding. And they're going as far in here to quote exactimate line items and then not even use the right line item for the quote. So again, it goes back to who's teaching these people how to do these things. And, there is that just very unbalanced bias that just exists here. And it's something that we're always combating. And it seems like every time we start to get to a point where we're standing on something that's right, they find a new way for it to be wrong.
So I think that the original story that you told is going to come down to a pollutant exclusion. The industrial hygienists are being sent out and told that they have to look to see if the water went through sewage of some kind before it's category 3. I think the reason they're wanting to use sewage specifically out of that whole list of other stuff that would make it category 3, I think it's because they want to eventually tie it to pollution or pollutant exclusion that seems to be
I would agree with
policies.
I would agree with you if I hadn't continued to hear especially over the last year that, and maybe you're right. Maybe that's the push. It's a long play, because I continued to hear that. This isn't the first time that I've heard, well, it didn't go through feces.
If it was the first time, they definitely wouldn't be something that's being pushed in that direction. But we started to see the pollutant exclusions and the pollutant endorsements coming out. And, most of us thought there was a result of COVID, and maybe that was what tied that together. But somebody got smart at some point and said, well, if we could tie all category 3 losses to pollutants as well, then we're going to be set. And the one thing that ties it to pollutant more than anything else would be sewage. So,
but it's such an isolated position to take, though.
Could be.
How many water losses are directly related to sewage?
How many roofers are looking for fractured matting before they believe that there's hail damage, just because they've been told that by the carrier side engineers forever? And they're starting.
Why are we taking shots at roofers? Why are we taking shots at roofers right now? I'm just curious.
Why do public adjusters do that too?
Because
I can say that because I was a roofer. I'm allowed.
So I started as a roofer too. So
so you can do it too. Okay. All right.
Yeah. I started as a roofer and then went to mitigation.
Shit about roofers.
Hey, I did construction my entire life until I went to law school. So I did remodeling bathrooms, building decks, everything. So hardwood floors. Yeah.
Would you? Well, here I have a question that's not related to the IH stuff. So with that being said, Remington, would you have considered yourself a general contractor?
No, I need a license.
I
would consider myself, though, a scientist of remodeling.
Do you have a stamp?
Okay,
do you have a stamp?
I don't think scientists have a stamp.
I can go get one at Office Max.
I just, it's an industry-wide problem that we continue to run across these people who, whether it's on the carrier side or on the contractor side, who, want to be more than what they are. If you're a roofer, you're a roofer. You don't need to go and tout that you're a general contractor. You're not building skyscrapers from the ground up, and nor does anybody give a shit.
Right.
And the same thing on the carrier side. If you're just a consultant, be a consultant. No, you don't need fancy titles. You don't need to come in, getting into a dick measuring contest with people over nothing.
Absolutely. Agreed. 100%.
John put this in writing. This is something that I've heard similar stuff from, but an insurance carrier basically suggesting that the homeowner remove the asbestos themselves, since right.
Why not?
I've been I had a homeowner once that was told by travelers to go ahead and remove the drywall themselves. It was only 1% asbestos in it.
Only
So
one?
It was only 1%.
Okay.
So, and then they should put the drywall into black plastic bags by themselves, not with anything else in it, and stick it on the front porch, and they would send someone to go pick it up afterwards.
Good. So no chain of custody, no chain of concern, none of that. That's cool.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, it's endangerment.
It absolutely is. But I had a carrier in Oklahoma tell me the same thing after the freeze. Oklahoma was a big point of a lot of tension for me when it comes to just normal mitigation practices. And I had a carrier no shit say, well, you're the only one that did asbestos surveys on the 150 some claims that I needed to do. I said, just because I'm the only one that did it doesn't mean that those other guys weren't wrong, right? Like, I understand that it streamlined your process to avoid those things, but on the particular one that we did, every material on that building contained asbestos. It was a $500,000 abatement bill, and he was probably pretty salty about that. But it's always something, and everybody has these just weird ass ideas of how to navigate this space, and just puts people into a position where you're doing something unsafe, you're doing something that could potentially be harmful. And that's why when you finally get a chance to read the new IICRC, there's a lot of parallels with OSHA in workplace safety when it comes to running negative air machines in there to reduce construction debris. When you're in the remediation space, it's hazardous materials that it's reducing, and then when you transition into the construction phase, leave those neg airs in there so they're reducing debris and pathogens in the air to get to your workers. So you're starting to see some more workplace safety stuff kind of starting to flood over into the mitigation world, which I think is great. It's just going to constantly be the carrier pushing back on some of those things, because now you have you ran your equipment for 7 to 10 days, depending on the building. It's stabilized.
What?
Man, I have missed talking to you, Matt. But now you're leaving that equipment in there for 3 months while they're doing the reconstruction, right? And so now the carrier's going to come back and say they're going to quote some bullshit line out of IICRC that one guy picked out of there because he had a boring Tuesday night, and they're going to try and position that around why you shouldn't have left those in there. And I put a lot of OSHA, a lot of IICRC statutes in my estimates when I write these large estimates, because you have to have that level of protection, because the moment that a carrier pushes back and argues, well, you don't need a safety supervisor. Well, I do, because OSHA says that's that person's sole job. They need to be on the job site for however many hours my guys are working. He can't have any other additional duties, and that is his job. And it's not my fault that Xactimate bills him at $67 an hour or whatever the hell the number is, right? But if you don't put the statute in there, they're just going to be like, no, we'll redline that, and it's not going to get paid for.
Absolutely. I mean, substantiating anything that's in an estimate is always a good idea. Building out an estimate, especially if you're going to put the Xactimate together and give them all the statutes to tie to each one of those line items, it can be daunting to read an estimate with all that, and I'm sure the carriers get annoyed by it, but you have to have that in there, or you're not going to have the right argument.
Absolutely.
James posted this.
I see it.
Somebody that he works for you now, doesn't he?
I don't like the word works for.
He works with you now, doesn't he?
Yes, we are absolutely a team. We are absolutely a team. And James is probably one of the biggest advocates for Robosky Consulting. So
James worked with me with me for a while down in Albany, Georgia. When I got stuck out there, he finally gave me some relief. I was very thankful that he came down and worked with us for the short time that he did.
Was that Hurricane Michael?
That was Michael. Yeah.
James very good at what he does.
Not saying that it is only covered based on the carrier standards, but if you can prove the claim by their standards, it is faster. I agree with this statement, and I do this with a lot of different types of damage. So you could argue that functional damage is bullshit and it has nothing to do with the policy that you're reading, for example. But if there is functional damage on site, then you might as well just show them that and not have that argument. So if you can find out that that water went through sewage, I mean, what is sewage exactly? Does it have to come from a sewer?
Well,
Backing up from beyond the trap. So anything beyond trap is sewage.
that is an open to interpretation in this industry loves that, right? Like let's make a bunch of very vague statements and then let everybody go crash their head against the wall trying to figure out what it is.
I think insurance policies should be attached to a Webster's dictionary. That way, every word that's in the policy is clearly defined and there's no issues, right?
Yeah. We could all be so lucky, right?
That would be great. I mean, everything would be black and white. There'd be no ambiguity.
It's black and white right now. It's black and white right now.
There's so many words in insurance policies that have multiple meanings, and they use those meanings against us. Your common interpretation from a layman would be completely different for the words direct physical loss than what the insurance carrier actually means by that.
But that's why we exist. But that's why we exist. That's why Remington exists, right? Because the homeowner doesn't need to know the finite details and definitions of what their policy is. That's why we exist in this space. Now, by and large, PAs suck. I'll be honest. That's true. There are people in the industry that think I suck. There are people in the industry that think that you suck. By and large, we suck, right?
Yeah, attorneys suck. So
yeah, same.
Well,
and what it is. And what it is, it goes back to what we were talking about right in the very beginning of this of Matthew, you're going to handle a claim completely different than the way that I handle a claim, right? And the contractor's expectation dictates whether we end up being a shitty PA or a good PA at the end of the day. And same thing with the attorneys.
Conrad is arguing that rainwater can absolutely contain sewage, and he's not wrong because of the water cycle. I'm going to be a scientist right now.
Can we get
all
that guy on
sewage here? Evaporates and becomes clouds and eventually comes back down. Was it sewage? It's gonna still have some bacteria in it.
I would love for somebody to find me water that has 0 bacteria in it.
See, it all has sewage. So what percentage of sewage has to be in the water then?
It's only 1% asbestos. It's fine.
As long as the homeowner is the one drinking the water, then.
Well, and while they can drink that water while they're black bagging their asbestos and dropping it at the curb. It's fine.
It is interesting.
CW has ever been on my show. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of respect for that, man.
Absolutely. And I think it's great, Daniel, you kind of have your niche in the field of, doing these water losses and things. I see it where a lot of public adjusters, not a lot, but, there's a handful amount of public adjusters that just only want to do fire losses, or only want to do roofs. It's good to see that, there's some water guys out there as well. I mean, it really is. So,
well, and we do a little bit of everything. But we have our thing that's our specialty, right? I mean, I've got a couple guys in the office that do nothing but residential roof claims, and that's what they're good at. That's what they want to do. So you try to teach them along the way, but you're not trying to push them into something that, look, the reality is that MIT claims and you start to get into remediation and the rollover into reconstruction. That is something that takes years of experience to learn and understand appropriately. And that's why you see so many guys get in over their heads when hurricanes hit, because they see the dollar amount, they see the potential profit margins that exist there, the mass amount of work, and they don't realize that carriers handle these claims completely different, right? A roof claim, they may deny it, and they may send a virtual, they may do this, they may do that, and you can ultimately, a lot of times, get those across the finish line. You can spend a year working on a MIT claim and be no different in no different of a position than you were the day you started it, right? Because the carrier's slow to move on these things. I had a conversation with a company earlier today, and I told them, I said, no matter how right you are, you're going to be wrong. And that's the way the carriers position these water losses. It's always, no matter how much documentation you have, how much justification you have, And these guys get out over their skis thinking they can go in and make a bunch of money, and they don't have the experience or the financial wherewithal to withstand, going a year on a project where they've expended a ton of money, and they don't bring in the right people because they want to do it themselves. They don't bring in PAs or lawyers or IH guys or whatever specialty needs to exist within that claim, and then they get screwed.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but for public adjusters or, contractors or even attorneys that are, going to get into some of these large water losses that you like to handle, what's like your number one tip to them getting into that sector?
Don't. I'm dead serious. Yeah. I am dead serious. And it's like me, I won't go work a fire claim because I don't have those years of experiences working a fire. Right now, do I want to learn those? Absolutely. But I need to learn from somebody who knows what the hell they're talking about. Right. And
I don't think you'd be very far off, though. To be honest, a lot of the fire and water stuff is so similar. It'd be a very
and that's what I've heard.
Easy transition for you.
But it's the OJT portion of working water claims is carries so much more weight than what you can read in a book. Right. And again, we talked earlier about how a lot of PAs transitioned from the roofing industry. Well, live in the space of what you know, and understand that you can't just jump off the ship without having the knowledge to do so. And the only reason that I'm in this space is because of the time that I was with Tad, and the multiple years of working large MIT claims gave me the knowledge to be able to navigate them now. If I didn't have that, I would be screwing claims up left and right on the water side because I wouldn't know how to position them. I wouldn't know how to argue them. And so this isn't something that you jump into lightly. And I'm not saying it like it's, Major League Baseball or anything here, but you have to have experience to be able to jump into it. And, to quote old Jack Hanks, experience matters, right? And it does. It really does.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if a policyholder doesn't have anybody and the carrier is not acting appropriately because the adjuster doesn't know any better and they're paid for 3 days of drying, and that's not enough, and a PA that really isn't as competent as you gets involved and improves the thing, they're still better off, even with a PA that isn't someone that's done this for 10, 20 years. So, I mean, there's something to be said about jumping in and doing what you can. At what point do you have enough experience to be able to be considered competent? Sometimes you just need to jump in and ask questions as you go and try to figure it out. Not completely.
Even right now, though, I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm competent, right? But the level of competency that people assume that I have is based off of
this is recorded, right?
Yeah. No, look, I'll be the first one to tell you I'm a shitty PA.
If you're ever
but I get shit bought.
assigned as an appraiser, that is going to come out instantly. He just said it right here. He's not competent. He's out.
I just want to say this right now. I met with Daniel a couple months ago in Texas, and we sat down, we had dinner, and then afterwards we had about another 2 hour or hour long conversation after dinner. He's competent, people. Don't let him fool you. All right.
I got an argument with one of your guys on that dinner.
Yeah, we won't talk about Voldemort there. Okay.
Yeah. That was a fun fight.
But that's all I'm saying is competency comes with time, and competency comes with people's perception of whether the shit that's coming out of your mouth is accurate or not.
Right.
I could stand up there all day and tell you that I'm the best person on the planet for fire claims. It's not accurate at all.
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you. Because he works with seepage.
It would have been better if you said sewage.
Conrad with the jokes.
This was a weird question from James.
Human sewage or animal sewage? Jesus Christ.
I mean, I think we're talking about feces specifically, but there could be animal sewage. It could be more than just their feces, but is that really what sewage is? I mean, if we're talking about beyond a trap, then it's water, toilet paper, and feces and urine, whatever you flush down a toilet or put down a drain, right? So what's the difference?
So the definition is wastewater and excrement.
We'll never know.
We'll never know.
Yeah, you broke up throughout that entire thing.
Oh, I said the definition is wastewater and excrement conveyed in sewers.
Okay, so it has to actually be moved through a sewer. So then we all have sewers in our house. The second it's beyond the trap, then our plumbing is technically a sewer.
Yeah. So sewage is wastewater or waste matter, such as feces or dirty water from homes or factories, which flow anyway through sewers or away through sewers. I'm sorry.
Hey, Matt, I'm looking at an insurance policy right now, and it says water or sewage from outside the residence premises plumbing system that enters through sewers or drains, or water which enters into overflows from a sub pump. So that they're saying some other
sewage can come from outside and come back. If you're connected to a sewer system and it overflows, a lot of times it'll back up into houses and things.
But you know what? That's under an exclusion. So they're saying if that sewage is from outside the plumbing system of the house,
if you keep reading, there's an ensuing loss provision tied to it.
Oh, I'm sure there is, but I'm just saying right, from that provision there is. You know,
are you reading a? Is that an Allstate policy?
The fact that you even have an educated guess on that is what sets you apart from me.
State Farm.
Really?
Yeah.
You know, that was the first one that popped in my head, and I'm like, no, I don't think it's State Farm. And I went straight to my second guess. I shouldn't have done that. But of course, you never know if I'm telling the truth now. So
you got to go with your gut.
That was my first guess, guys. Obviously, I knew what I was talking about. I just dropped my pizza all over.
Hey, this was a great conversation. I learned, and I love doing that, talking with you guys, Daniel and Matt.
But I really want to get back to that World Series.
Well,
it is. How many innings have you missed?
It is. We're in the third inning here.
Right. I think we will have to.
There's six more. It's fine.
Remington and I are in the Atlanta market, and the Braves are playing the World Series, and we haven't screwed up yet. So we have to go watch the thing.
There you go.
Of course, it's a matter of time.
Yeah, Matt, don't do that to me. Don't do that to me. Come on now.
It's an Atlanta team, Remington.
I know. We're going to be fine. We're going to be good to go. Yeah. I know it.
Daniel, I really appreciate you being on. It was a good show. I bet there's going to be a lot of people that want your contact information. Can you tell us how to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I can either. You just normally throw it in the messages,
I'm going to throw it in there as you say it out loud.
You can email me at daniel@roboskyconsulting.com. You can call me at 270-925-8935. Consulting.com. Yeah, I didn't get the phone number. 270-925-8935. And don't leave me a voicemail. Shoot me a text.
8935.
Correct. And don't leave me a voicemail. Shoot me a text.
You'll get to it a lot faster, won't you?
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Daniel. Thanks again, man. I'm going to kick you off.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
See you, buddy. Nice seeing you again, man.
Remington, that was a good show. Get rid of James real quick.
It was, and I learned, like I said, and hey, he knows his stuff when it comes to these large water losses. You can tell he's passionate about it, and I love that.
Yeah, it's hard not to be when you're dealing with water losses because you have arguments on every freaking claim, and so you really dig into that stuff. There's so much bad information given to the opposing side.
Yeah,
and wild generalizations on what it takes to do something.
Absolutely.
And there's actually science behind all of it. So I'm not going to keep you any longer. We're going to be back on again next Tuesday. I'll be back in Florida at the new, we have a new studio. That's the word I was looking for. I can't wait for you to come down and check it out. You'll be down for parts of the flat roof course that's coming up in a couple of weeks, though. So I'll see you then.
I will. Absolutely, man.
I don't know who's on next week. Again, I still am reeling from the moment when I deleted my entire calendar. So if you're set up for next week, you need to reach out to me. I have no idea. I'm a professional organization over here.
Hey, Matt, that was a fabulous show. Having Daniel on was great. And I think everybody who listened to that learned something today. So that was the goal. And we had fun.
Yeah, we had fun. Yeah. Do you have a stamp by it here?
No, there is. Attorneys typically don't have a stamp, but they do have it like for signatures for paralegals, just a stamp like our signature. But other than that, no, there's no like professional stamp like there is for a forensic engineer.
Strangely, someone like Daniel would trust a paralegal more than you then.
I guess, I'll have to talk to him about that.
The sad world. All right, I'll see you later, Remington.
See you guys.
Collaborate, people.